This presentation is about how we justify its validity apart from the expert panel and the focus group feedback. So here we have the table of contents. I'm not going to present the details of the test in sections 5, 6, and 7 in order to save time. Okay, so this 15 minutes is going to be quite compressed. I'm going to make these slides available to you upon request. So if you need to visit any of the points in more details, feel free to email me. I've left my email address at the end, at the last slide. Okay, so the next thing I want to point out is if you look at the top left-hand corner of every slide, from this slide onwards, you will see the table of contents replicated. Okay, and the place we are at the table of contents is the font is in red. So it helps you to keep track of where we are because the discussion can get quite involved. Okay, so without further ado, let's begin. Let's start with disinformation. What is disinformation? A very intuitive characterization of disinformation is it's false information that's deliberately and often covertly spread in order to influence public opinion or obscure the truth. From here, we can get some points. First of all, that it's false information. Second of all, it's intentionally communicated as true. And this sets it apart from misinformation, which could be accidental. Different types of disinformation include fake news, false rumors, intentional false advertising, and so forth. But our focus is on fake news. Next, we come to disinformation response. What is disinformation response? We stipulate it to be identification of possible disinformation and tendency to spread the possible disinformation. Why is this important? Important because of the concern about the effects of fake news, concerns about how it might destabilize society, influence national elections, or even derail public health initiatives. Okay, so we are interested in this because we are interested in stopping the spread of fake news. Next, we come to this idea of a competency. What is a competency? The important words are highlighted in reddish font here. Is a criterion referenced effective performance. Okay, so when we want to put this definition in the context of disinformation, what we have is this criterion, okay, is an effective response to disinformation, okay, consists in correctly identifying possible disinformation and in not spreading it. Okay, so then we can come up with this idea of a competency, which consists in the underlying characteristics of an individual that are causally related to correctly identifying possible disinformation and in not spreading it. Why should we test disinformation response competency? First of all, it helps us to identify groups of people who are particularly susceptible to fake news. And second of all, it allows us to assess the effectiveness of initiatives that aim at reducing people's susceptibility to fake news. What is a competency test instrument then? It is an instrument that measures competency. We cannot observe a competency, but we can posit it as a cause of observable effects. Now, if these effects are measurable, then we can measure the competency. This leads us to a general form of the disinformation response competency test instrument that I present in the form of a diagram here. Okay, so basically what we have here is we start off with the red boxes. That's what we are interested in. Okay, we are interested in being the ability to correctly identify disinformation and the unwillingness to spread disinformation. However, these two things are difficult to measure, right? Because first of all, correctly identifying disinformation, we don't know if the subject already knows that information to be false. Okay, and second of all, unwilling to spread information, unwillingness is a mental state. Okay, it's not observable as it is. So from here, we posit the cause of these two phenomena as something we call reason discernment and truth orientation, respectively. And these posit causes of effects that can be measured, namely reason discernment. We posit that if the cause of the competency to identify, evaluate reasons, assumptions, and objections. And the other aspect, truth orientation, we posit it as the cause of a phenomenon that can be measured. It is the disinclination to use unverified or false information as factual to influence others. Okay, and these in turn cause performance on test items that can allow for their measurement. At the end of this deck of slides, I will give you an example of one such test item. Okay, so we have come to the end of introducing the terms in the title of this presentation. The next few sections have to do with justifying the validity of this test in terms of looking at what's available out there, the alternatives that people have considered trying to use to measure disinformation response competency. The first one here is something called the CRT, Cognitive Reflection Test. It's one of the most studied cognitive tests so far. And as I said, I'm not going to go into detail of the test in order to save time. If you want a good summary, look at yesterday's, if you're in Singapore, it's the Sunday Times, or a few days ago, Financial Times. There is this article here, which nicely summarizes the state of the art to test. Okay, the next kind of cognitive test we can look at information literacy tests, of which I have three here. They look at two competencies. They evaluate the competency to evaluate the truth of content and the application of intellectual property considerations. And finally, we have the PISA, Program for International Student Assessment. Again, they have this competency to evaluate truth of content. But interestingly, and this is the highlighted version part of the text here, they look at competencies related to character building. Okay, I will return to this point in a moment. What are the problems with these cognitive tests? The problem is that these tests do not measure motivation. Okay, they measure the ability of individuals to discriminate genuine and fake news, but they do not measure the individuals' dispositions to discriminate. They do not measure individuals' willingness to spread unverified information. So, for example, and this is a very significant instance, proficient fake news creators may score well on these tests. Okay, so let's look at objections to the problems that I raised. Okay, so the first objection is the CRT correlates negatively with the tendency to disseminate news. Okay, this is the result of a study. You can ask me for the reference if you're interested. Okay, so how do I respond to this objection? My response here is that we are interested in identifying individuals who fall outside the general correlations of high cognitive scores and low tendency to disseminate unverified information. For example, the proficient fake news creator. Okay, these are rare, but they are the kinds of people that we want to pick up with the test. The second objection is the PISA test for responsible action towards collective well-being, things having to do with character development. Okay, this leads us to the next big question: would a moral test help? Okay, so my response to the whole set of moral tests will also be a response to this second objection. Now, let's look at moral tests. I want to look at two moral tests very commonly used that find their basis in Kohlberg's 6 stages of moral development. Okay, the original test was called the moral judgment interview by Kohlberg, but it's very time and resource consuming because it requires trained interviewers and scorers and so on and so forth. What we want to take over from this slide is the 6 stages. Okay, these track an individual through the different stages of moral development. Okay, so the defining issues test is one such test. It's an improvement because it's a pen and paper test. Okay, it allows for quantitative analysis and processing, which is much more efficient. The moral competence test is another version. The difference is this one concentrates on consistency of moral judgment, while the other one takes a look at the stage at which the subject is at the time of taking the test. Okay, what are the problems with respect to the moral test? The main problem here is that moral outrage is a powerful motivator to action. Okay, and presumably the higher you score on Kohlberg stages, the more aware you are of moral norms, moral principles that are being violated, and hence the more susceptible you are to moral outrage. Right? So it could turn out that someone who scores well for DIT or MC will be someone who is actually willing to spread information when provoked by moral outrage. Okay, so yeah, okay, so let's move on to something else. Okay, so what the cognitive and moral validity problems have shown us is that there are two inseparable aspects of the construct, namely cognitive aspect and the motivational aspects. And now I want to switch gears a little bit and look at rumor studies, okay, because rumors are quite similar to fake news. Okay, they are unverified and can be false. They have function on the basis of factual appearance and rely on an interest in knowing them. Okay, so what I want to do is look at the functions of rumor, okay, and point your attention to the fact that tracking truth is not among one of the functions, and this is a significant similarity it shares with fake news. Okay, so what we need is a conceptual framework, okay, that we can use to underpin the disinformation competency test. And the similarities with rumor suggest that we can borrow the unproblematic aspects of a conceptual framework underpinning rumor studies to underpin our disinformation response competency test. Okay, so let's move on and look at one such framework. Okay, so this framework is in the form of informational and normative determinants of online rumor spreading that motion that in turn leads to the attitude and behavior of spreading rumors online. All the highlighted terms here, I have put it into a diagrammatic representation. The arrows indicate causal factors, okay? Now, what we can say about this, this diagram, okay, this framework, are three problems first and foremost. The first problem is there seems to be a double counting of the argument strength. Okay, so informational based factors, argument strength, there seems to be double counting in the sense that if you suffer from confirmation bias, okay, your confirmation bias could make you perceive an argument as strong. Okay, so it already has argument strength. And then if you look at argument strength here, you're actually double counting it. Okay, so that's the first problem that I can see. The second problem I can see is informational and normative is ill-defined in the sense that normative means relating to an evaluative standard. Okay, and here, they want to hive off consensus as the normative base factor, but you realize that argument strength and source credibility are themselves also evaluative in nature, right? Argument strength is in virtue of meeting standards of good argument. Source credibility is in virtue of meeting standards of good sources. So there's a confusion of categories here. And finally, the last problem I note here is that this causal direction between cognitive and emotion, studies have shown that it can be reversed, okay? When people are faced with very morally outrageous situations that don't cause harm, they tend to have their moral outrage cause them to have moral judgment, okay? And then subsequently, they come up with a reason to rationalize that judgment. Okay, so here are the three problems, and the takeaway from these three problems is that there are cognitive and emotional causal factors responsible for one's transmission of this information. Okay, pitched at a general enough level, such as this, I do not categorize the cognitive factors. Okay, so I avoid the double counting problem. I do not fix a causal direction from cognition to emotion. Okay, and I do not commit to a fixed list of cognitive factors because there could be others. Okay, and most importantly, it recognizes both the cognitive and emotional causal factors in the spread of this information. So where does this lead us? This leads us to posit a norm of truth orientation. Okay, and the norm is this: do not transmit unverified information as news unless you wish to inform others of what you take. Okay, the as news element encodes the factual appearance of the information. we posit that any behavior that deviates from this norm will indicate a lower level of truth orientation than one that does not. And one needs to have affection for the norm. That's the emotional part, and to recognize content as news in order to accord with the norm. The recognition, that is the cognitive part. Okay, so where does this lead us? This leads us to the form of a test item. Okay, so here's an example of a test item. It consists in the stem, which gives you a scenario. Okay, so the scenario here is a post appears on your Facebook feed with the heading "Singapore rediscovers vouchers are transferable." The author lists the advantages of pooling the tourism vouchers for family staycation. Okay, followed by three different items. The first is a certainty probe, by which we probe whether the respondent considers the scenario information surely false, surely true, or some degree in between them. Okay, the second one is the argument evaluation probe, which helps us to ascertain their competence in identifying reasons for claims, objections, assumptions, and so on. And finally, we have the dissemination motivation probe. Okay, and this one enables us to measure whether they deviate from the norm that I previously referred to or not. Okay, so this is the final form of the test. And the final slide I have here is practical advantages. Okay, so first of all, it's quantitative versus qualitative. The data is all in the form of numbers. It can be all in the form of numbers. You don't have qualitative responses that you need to code. So it's fast and it's scalable. It's also easier to compose the test items than the CRT. If you go and look at an example of the CRT that I have on the CRT slide, you will see that it's actually quite difficult to come up with many of such items. Finally, customizable item contents. Okay, the scenarios can be customized. This means that I can have small modules that are self-contained and that have this as the assessment. Okay, to teach about fake news and fake news response. I can also infuse these in our curriculum. And in fact, this is part of a larger study to infuse into the secondary school geography curriculum with respect to fake news about climate change. Okay, I've reached the end of my presentation. Sorry for the rush because I was trying to get through many slides within this 15 minutes and still have time for Q&A. I'll be happy to continue our discussion of this presentation by email. My email is there. But if you have any questions now and if we have more time before the next presenter, feel free to ask me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Kwek, for this.